Hi, y'all, and welcome back to another episode of There's Danger Here. I'm Leilani, and today we're going to talk about caretakers of the deceased, specifically those who, of course, are not doing what they should. Let's get into this, shall we? When a loved one passes away, they typically end up at a mortuary, a place designed to care for the afterlife process, whether it be burial or cremation. The family entrusts the funeral directors to be responsible to properly complete the final wishes. But time and time again, there are cases where morticians fail to not only give the respect everyone deserves, but in some cases are so horrific, it becomes criminal. Here are a few of these cases. First, let's talk about the big one. Lamb Funeral Home in Pasadena, California. It was originally founded by Charles F. Lamb in 1929. A pillar of the community, he gained a notoriety for treating everyone well. As Charles got older, he passed the family business on to his son Lawrence Lamb. Then, as Lawrence Lamb got ready to retire, he passed it on to his daughter, Lori Ann Lamb Sconce. Lori Ann and Jerry ran it, raising their sons. David, who thought he was bound to have a football career, but ended up tripping in a gopher hole, according to him, and messed up his leg, ending his potential career. His parents decided after that he should maybe go to Cypress College and take mortuary classes, to eventually take over as the funeral director. David reports that of this, he didn't think that it was a big deal, as he had already known how to embalm by the time he was 12. In 1980, while taking classes, cremation had started picking up in popularity. Pasadena Crematorium, run by Diesel and Gravity, was privately owned but on the same property as the Lamb Funeral Home. The crematorium worked exclusively for the Lamb Funeral Home. After finding out that most people had used off-site crematoriums for a fee of between $300 and $450, plus the cost to transport the bodies back and forth, David realized that he could seriously undercut his competitors and got a box truck, picking up numerous people at the same time. Starting in 1981, the cremations through David began, with the year ending in a total of 192. At this time, he used his Dodge van to pick up bodies and bring them to the crematorium and charged the other funeral homes $55. As a result of the cheap cost, by 1982, the numbers skyrocketed to 1,675. In order to handle the increase in numbers, David hired Danny Galambos, Dave Edwards, and Andre Augustine. All three had large post-football physiques, making it easier for them to move people around. The men stated that they worked with a 14-foot box truck, no liftgate, and no air. Their instructions were to pick up the individuals and bring them to the crematorium. That was it. David then hired Johnny Polerna to run the crematorium. Bringing him in and teaching him how to use the oven, Pasadena Crematorium had two. A reputable cremation specialist spoke about how it would take about 2 hours to complete the cremation, let the oven cool, clean, and then refire. Johnny reported that when he was trained, David would place 2 to 3 bodies into one chamber at a time, making it seem like that was just a normal process. And as Johnny had never been taught otherwise, he actually believed this was normal at first. As the number of pickups increased, the need to put more people in a chamber increased, and it was reported that up to 15 people were placed in a single chamber at a time. In order to make some people fit, they even had their collarbones, legs, or arms broken and folded to fit into the chamber. By 1983, David completed 3,487 cremations, so we're seriously moving up in these numbers. David spoke about the increase in numbers and said, you could put one body in and it would take 2 hours, or 10 bodies and it would take 2.5 hours. Reporting that any crematorium cannot get all of the person out of the oven anyway, so commingling of ash didn't mean anything to him. David also reports that many of his cremations were scatter at sea, and so that led him to justify this even further, saying they were going to commingle in the water anyway, so why should it matter if they were cremated together or not? Eventually, this increase got people talking. the volume of cremations and how the crematorium shouldn't be able to handle it. One of those people was Tim Waters, a man in his early 20s that was a competing cremation provider. Through his company, Alpha Society Cremation Services, David attempted to buy out Tim's business after meeting Tim, and Tim would say he openly didn't trust David. Not at all. An unnamed person, who reports he used to work for David around the same time, said he got started because he and Johnny used to get high together. One time Johnny asked for help unloading bodies, and so this man helped, at which time David happened to show up and ended up hiring him as well. He also reports this is when they would cut fingers off and take rings off people, take their clothes and shoes to resell, that he and Johnny would smoke rock cocaine while they worked. David's ex-wife, Barbara, said that this was about the time that David walked in with a cup one day that said AU, which is an abbreviation for gold. David went to the garage and got a hammer and would smash the teeth and take the gold away. Johnny said that David would call taking teeth out popping chops. Other employees said that the bodies were searched for gold and that he was likely bringing in about $20,000 in just gold a month. As this continued, so did the rise of cremations, hitting 4,350 by 1984. Tim Waters and Ron Hass got ready to report on David Sconce and how they believed he was working inappropriately. So, David supposedly had men go and threaten Ron Hass. Then soon after, Tim was found beaten. But he presses on, and then 4 months later, Tim is dead at age 24. Though David denies any involvement, and according to the records, he did die of a heart attack. In 1985, cremations again are skyrocketing. They go up to 8,173. During this time, David started going out and soliciting businesses from farther and farther locations away from Pasadena. And then, by 1986, the number of cremations completed by David or overseen by him were 25,285. Johnny says of this time that he could never catch up. The freezer stayed full, and the shelves did too, no matter how many bodies they put in each of the oven at a time. On November 23rd, the unnamed worker was running the crematorium when he left to get high. He said of this he fell asleep instead of shutting everything down, and in the early morning hours Lorianne called him, telling him that the crematorium was on fire. David received a call from Johnny that the crematorium had burnt down. But even though the crematorium burnt down, David kept picking up bodies. David said he didn't stop, but nobody could figure out where he was cremating his bodies. That's when air quality engineer for San Bernardino County, Richard Wales, said that they received several complaints from community members of the Heparia area that a company called Oscar Ceramics, that purportedly made ceramic tiles for NASA and the space industry, had a smell, smoke, and at times flames coming out of it. One resident stated it was burning flesh, and he knew because he was there to liberate Auschwitz, and he remembers that odor. When looking into the company, Richard determined the company was owned by none other than David Sconce. Johnny said this operation lasted about 3 months. That's when Sergeant David Dykes, with the San Bernardino Police Department, had a couple patrolmen drive by Oscar Ceramics, noting flames under the doors. Sergeant David went out along with the fire department and air quality control. Johnny allowed them to enter, and Sergeant David said there was soot everywhere, so sticky it would simply stick to you and your shoes and your clothes. They found barrels of prosthesis, as, of course, prosthesis don't burn. The police turned the power off and cooled the kilns. When they were opened, they found bones and skin from multiple bodies. They noted trenches right in front of the kilns, about 4 inches wide, that ran to the back of the shop. which allowed fat to drain into the field behind it. At the time of the raid, the average number of bodies in the kiln were 150 to 200. David says that he was in a hurry and should have gotten the conditional permits for the cremation. It was the only thing he believed that he was doing inappropriately at this time. Search warrant went out to the Lamb Funeral Home. Sergeant David stated that Lorianne was the sweetest woman you could talk to. She was open about the funeral operations, but that she knew nothing about the crematoria part, as that was left for David to run. But the back of the shop had hundreds of bodies and parts stacked up. Sergeant David even noted photographs of what he believed to be embalming process on the wall, taking those photos. A second search warrant went out to Lawrence Lamb's house. Again, everyone was cooperative. Sergeant David stated Lawrence seemed to be a stand-up guy and believed he ran the business appropriately when it was in his control. A third search warrant went out back at Oscar's Ceramics. Along with the desecration of bodies, multiple environmental issues were noted. The result was arrest of all the employees. And while originally most of them kept their mouths shut, soon former employees were opening up and telling police and reporters what had happened at the crematorium. Still, with all this, the information they had, most of the crimes were considered misdemeanors. A task force was created and police brought in the auditor for California Funeral Board, Skip Jones. Skip had audited the Lamb Funeral Home and pre-need trust accounts in 1986. Skip said Lorianne's aura was amazing, that she seemed fit for the job. That was her reason for being. But even so, there was a problem with the pre-need accounts. There were approximately 170 accounts that she was taking money for that weren't being reported on. And Skip explained how to correct those issues as Lorianne seemed just distraught about it, how to put the money in accounts and start reporting on them to the state. Still, by the time of the task force, when followed up on, Lorianne still hadn't reported any of the money, earning her over $90,000 in interest alone, making this grand theft, and the DA had their first felony charge. Now, remember those embalming photos? Two deputy coroners see them in the task force and report they aren't embalming photos. They are harvesting body parts. Andre stated he saw a few extractions of those body parts corroborating this information and that it was generally common knowledge between the employees. David reported that he went to a mortuary where he saw George Bristol with surgical equipment on the table. Slit lamb mows cornea off the eye without ruining it. George explained he was working for Dehaney Eye Bank, and David said he gets about 1,000 people a month, and even if only 100 were viable, that'd be a lot of corneas. Together, the two did research, and in turn, David created the Coastal International Eye and Tissue Bank, Inc., bringing in other professionals and establishing ties with organizations across the U.S. David stated, "While you can't sell organs, you can bill for your time in making them available, and that's, quote, how you get around it," end quote. Lorianne had a chart in her office of how much a person should be. A man was between 5 and 7 pounds, a woman 3 to 5 pounds, children 11 ounces to 22 ounces, and a baby 1 envelope of ash, making it unlikely that she didn't know about the crematorium and its deeds. The previous employees reported that she was fake and pious, but in the background was telling those who picked up bodies to check and see if their eyes were dry or wet if they were warm. If they weren't wet, to use eye drops. That she kept a box of ashes at her desk that she used for baby's ashes. They also report Jerry was the one to pop chops the most often, even joking that that was how he could pay for all the employees. The task force continued working and looked into the night of Tim Waters being attacked. A neighbor at this time of the event actually saw two guys eating and throwing their trash out the window, and they happened to notify the Burbank police, who came and picked up the trash and put it in evidence. So for 2.5 years, it was there. The task force managed to pull it and found prints on a carton of milk. Danny Galambos was positively identified through fingerprints. Danny was questioned and opened up pretty much immediately. He was subsequently arrested, and at the time, he told police David told him that he poisoned him, and that's what killed him. While the original report was labeled as a heart attack, tissue samples were obtained at the time of autopsy, but not tested, and so the DA ordered the samples to be analyzed, in which oleander extract was found in the tissue, which can be deadly. Meanwhile, as the investigation continues, the DEA is ready to file charges for the offenses at the funeral home. Roger Diamond, the family attorney, told them to show up for their charging. They were accused of embezzling funds from prepaid funeral accounts, illegally harvesting and selling body parts and tissues, and cremating bodies together without consent from next of kin. The parents bail out with about $5,000 apiece, and the DA Walt Lewis increased David's bail without telling anybody to $500,000 for 36 felony and misdemeanor counts. Roger Diamond went to bat for his client, but the judge stated that he was a flight risk and a menace to society, and if she could, she would have increased that bail amount. As such, he was immediately arrested and taken to jail. During much of the conspiracy talk, it comes out that a man named Ron Jordan worked for David in 1985 as a transporter. But once Ron saw what was actually happening, he quit. He reported to his friends, "If anything happens to me, look at Dave." And 2 weeks later, Ron, quote unquote, committed suicide, found hanging. Nothing ever comes from this, although multiple employees say that it was definitely David who killed Ron. In 1988, the preliminary hearing went through, lasting 6 months, with 99 witnesses. Many of the previous employees received probation instead of jail or prison time for their testimony. Family members also testified as victims. The ruling was that there was sufficient evidence to try all of them. David would be tried alone, while Jerry and Lorianne would be tried together, but separate from David. During Jerry and Lorianne's trial, they blamed their son and said they were simply in the dark about everything. David said he did try to take the blame because his parents were nothing but good to him. However, a document surfaced from Coastal Cremations in which a line was added to allow the removal of tissues in the middle of the document, not noted in early documents, but kind of added in later on. In other areas, it is proved that Lorianne actually forged documents, and at one point she even misspelled one of the family members' names in which she was forging. In the end, both Jerry and Lorianne received 3 years and 8 months for their crimes. Then it was David who went to trial, in which 20 of the counts were dismissed, including conspiracy to murder. The deal was David ended up pleading guilty to 21 counts on August 30th, 1989, and received 5 years for his crimes. According to Justia law, as part of the plea, quote, should the state obtain a reversal of the conspiracy to commit murder charge Judge Smerling has dismissed earlier, he could then plead guilty to that charge as well, receive probation, and be required to serve no additional prison time. It was further agreed that the arrangement would apply to a number of other funeral home counts on appeal at that time, end quote. Justia Law also reported further, and bear with me, this is a long quote as I'm not of legal background, so I'm going to repeat it as it's reported in the actual document. Quote, on October 1st, 1991, after Sconce had been released from state prison in the normal course, the state requested that the plea bargain be set aside, contending for the first time that the judge had lacked jurisdiction to offer a plea bargain with respect to the conspiracy charge because it was on appeal at the time of the plea bargain was offered and accepted. Sconce brought a motion to enforce the plea bargain. On December 24th, 1991, Superior Court Judge Paul Boland invalidated the plea agreement. The case had been assigned to him following Judge Smerling's recusal. Judge Boland found that Judge Smerling was without authority to take any action with respect to the conspiracy charge and, as a result of any of Judge Smerling's actions, including contingent offers made during the pendency of the appeal, are not subject to enforcement. Judge Boland concluded, moreover, that even if Judge Smerling had jurisdiction to make the contingent offer, the plea agreement was invalid because of the charge was not an appropriate one for plea bargaining under California Penal Code 1192.7. On January 9, 1992, Sconce challenged the constitutionality of the rescission of the plea agreement. The California Court of Appeal denied Sconce's petition for a writ of mandate. It ruled that his remedy, if he so choose, was to withdraw from the plea bargain in its entirety and to enter a new plea. On January 27, 1992, Sconce sought review in the California Supreme Court. The court denied review on March 11, 1992, with one justice voting to hear the case. Sconce filed for a petition of a writ of certiorari in the United States Supreme Court in June 3rd of 1992, which was denied October 5th, 1992. On February 8th, 1994, the state filed a motion to consolidate a remaining funeral home count with a conspiracy charge. The motion was granted. The state subsequently sought Sconce's transfer from Arizona, where he was serving a 5-year sentence on unrelated charges. On approximately October 4th, 1995, Sconce was transferred to the custody of the sheriff of Los Angeles County pending trial. On February 7, 1996, Sconce filed a civil rights complaint seeking an order restraining the state from prosecuting him on the conspiracy charge. On February 14, 1996, Judge John Davis ruled on the merits by construing this civil rights case as a habeas corpus petition. Judge Davies distinguished Santobello v. New York on the ground that it contemplate plea bargains between the defendant and the prosecutor only. In addition, Judge Davies found that the plea was based on unlawful and therefore unfillable promises. Judge Davies concluded that the trial court lacked jurisdiction to enter a plea bargain concerning the conspiracy charge because the matter was on appeal at the time, and that it also lacked authority to enter the plea bargain because California Penal Code 1192.7 precluding bargaining regarding such a charge. On February 20th, 1996, in a proceeding relating to the conspiracy charge, Sconce's counsel, relying on the plea bargain, offered a conditional plea in the state court. Counsel stated, "For the record, Mr. Sconce does again offer to plead to the murder conspiracy case, and if the court will accept it and agree to give probation to Mr. Sconce, he will make that offer." The trial court rejected the offer, stating, "I've seen Judge Smerling's scars. I'm not willing to get in the same box." End quote. So again, I know this was long, but it has to do a lot with kind of the murder charges and all these things. And so what happens is the DA wasn't done. They charged David Sconce with the death penalty case for the murder of Tim Waters. David stated he simply didn't do it, and so he said, quote, "dig him up," end quote. He was in fact exhumed, and as it turns out, he was in an above-ground casket, and so they tested everything that they could for oleandrin. But on April 4th, 1991, they were back in court, and the case was dismissed. Nothing was found in the tissues. After this, the family moved to Lake Mojave in 1994. David drove buses for a business called LTI, and he was given tickets to sell for $20 apiece. However, in true David fashion, instead, he made his own tickets to sell and keep the money. He was caught, and for that he faced forgery charges. For this, he was sentenced to another 5 years. It was at this time that Barbara finally got divorced from him, and from there he was in and out of court for multiple parole violations, even as he moved from states to California. Finally, in 2012, he was given a felony with a firearm in California and ended up being sentenced to 25 to life, being sent to Mule Creek State Prison to serve his time. In 2023, he was considered parole suitable and was released. And that is about all we have on David Sconce. Now, he wasn't the only case. So here's kind of a rundown on a couple other cases that I found. In 2022, in Grand Junction, Colorado, owners of a funeral home were found guilty of selling body parts and giving client fake ashes. In 2023, in Penrose, Colorado, nearly 200 bodies were found stored at room temperature and decomposing at the Return to Nature funeral home in Penrose. The owners, John and Carrie Halford, stacked bodies going on top of each other beginning in about 2019. They would give fake ashes to family members while not actually taking care of the bodies. The funeral home supposedly specialized in burials where no chemicals were used and the remains were placed in biodegradable caskets. Obviously, they never made it to the caskets. After the discovery, the couple fled to Oklahoma, were caught in November of 2023 and placed on a $2 million bond, being charged with 190 counts of abuse of a corpse, 5 counts of theft, 5 counts of money laundering, and more than 50 counts of forgery. In a civil suit, the owners were ordered to pay $950 million to the families of victims. The case went to trial in 2025, and the presiding Judge Bentley rejected both Halford's plea agreements that they attempted to make. Families started asking for 200 years, one for each body. A victim's family member, Derek Johnson, stated of this, quote, "We are not asking for revenge. We are asking for acknowledgement, for the court to see each victim as the human being that they were," end quote. Both Halfords have also admitted in federal court to defrauding the U.S. Small Business Administration out of nearly $900,000 in pandemic-era aid and taking payments from customers for cremations the funeral home clearly never did. PBS News stated, quote, officials said the two spent lavishly buying a GMC Yukon, laser body sculpting, vacations, jewelry, and cryptocurrency. After pleading guilty in federal court, John Halford was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Carrie Halford's sentencing in the federal case is scheduled for December of 2025, end quote. Still, this isn't it. August 2025 in Pueblo, Colorado, 24 bodies and multiple containers of bones and human tissue were found hidden at a funeral home, the Davis Mortuary, which was owned by a county coroner, Brian Cotter. In this case, the bodies were discovered decomposing, hidden behind a cardboard display during an inspection. The inspectors smelled the decomposition, and Brian asked them not to enter the room. Brian reported that some of the bodies had been awaiting cremation for almost 15 years. Brian and his brother bought the mortuary in 1989, and Brian purportedly gave families fake ashes instead of their loved ones' remains. Governor Jared Polis called for Brian's resignation, stating, quote, "I'm sickened for the families of the loved ones who are impacted by this unacceptable misconduct. It is clear public trust has been lost, and Mr. Cotter must resign as the Pueblo County coroner immediately. He should be investigated and, if warranted, prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. No one should ever have to wonder if their loved one is being taken care of with dignity and respect after they've passed, and Mr. Cotter must be held to account for his actions," end quote. Brian did in fact resign on September 2nd, 2025. The same month, the owners of the building where Davis Mortuary was run evicted Brian on the grounds of criminal activity and improper storage of human remains. And I know a few of these cases in Colorado, it seems to be the result of lack of rules for mortuaries in that state. One stated that at some point they didn't even require a license for funeral directors, and they didn't allow for state inspections routinely up until pretty recently. It was reactive, not proactive, unfortunately. But even with all these numbers, they aren't the only cases. Also, many states suffer similar scandals, often noted on smaller scales. Still, it's hard to read and then trust your loved ones to a person or a company once they've passed, making these their own gruesome true crime stories. And remember, to all those out there listening, be careful. It's a dangerous world we live in.